I suggest we will start with the session. Good morning to all of you in Belgium, be it here present in Brussels or joining us online, and good evening to everyone joining from Australia. Welcome to this session dedicated to offshore wind and green hydrogen. Let me first introduce myself. I'm Karin de Vleeschouwer. I'm the area manager for Southeast Asia and Oceania at Flanders Investment and Trade based in Brussels. And we are organizing this session today with a view on, and it's quite a mouthful, the Belgian Economic Mission to the Commonwealth of Australia, presided by Her Royal Highness Princess Astrid of Belgium, representative of His Majesty the King. And I will refer from now on to that as the BEM, the Belgian Economic Mission to Australia. In a nutshell, it is organized by 5 entities in Belgium: the Belgian Foreign Trade Agency, the Federal Public Service of Foreign Affairs, and the 3 regional export promoting agencies, AWEX, Hub Brussels, and Flanders Investment and Trade. So we will go with a large delegation to Australia end of October. The delegation will consist of officials accompanied by a large group of companies from various sectors. And Flanders Investment and Trade is putting forward renewable energy as a key sector in the mission program, with a special focus on offshore wind and hydrogen. So this info session aims to provide more info on these sectors and also show you how this BEM can be a unique opportunity for you to explore the Australian market, to establish new contacts and possible partnerships. I'll quickly run to the program of today. After me, I will give the floor to my colleague Kim de Meijer, our Science and Technology Counselor based in Singapore. He will talk about the Australian energy markets and give you an outlook of the 2 sectors in question. This will be followed by a presentation by Justin O'Connor of the Office of Energy and Climate Change, and he will bring an overview of the projects and opportunities in New South Wales, followed by Siep Hoogstra, who will do the same for the state of Victoria. After that, I will bring you an overview of the program of the BEM with a specific focus on the energy-related activities. And after that, my colleague, Luca Botelho of the Flanders Investment and Trade Office in Melbourne will give us some concluding remarks. And after that, there's also time to put forward your questions. Should you have any questions now already, you can put them in the chat and we will address them at the end. So I will now give the floor to Kim.
Yes. Thank you very much, Karin. Good morning as well, and also a special thank you to all the people in Australia that are sacrificing their Friday evening to sit in on this webinar and this hybrid session actually. So as Karin said, I'm Kim de Meijer. I'm the Science and Technology Counselor for Flanders Investment and Trade, looking after climate solutions and digital technologies. I'm based out of Singapore, looking after the whole of Southeast Asia and Oceania. We'll start with the energy market and climate-related targets for Australia. Just as a short introduction, so Australia is a federal country, just like Belgium. Australia has 6 states, 3 internal territories and 6 external territories. And during the course of the presentation, I from time to time will simplify a few things, just for the sake of time and for the sake of understanding things better. But the main messages will, of course, be relevant. During the Princely mission, and Karin will surely come back to this later, we will visit Sydney and Melbourne. So housed in New South Wales and Victoria. Those are 2 states that are quite important in the economy of Australia, economic powerhouses. And why I mention these states separately is because actually within the Australian framework, there has been a climate law that has been voted last year. but every state separately also already has their own targets and also has own rules on energy policy and climate change objectives. So we will hear from representatives of those states later, but I will already try to give you a general overview of the Australian energy market and Australian objectives. Now, if you look at the energy market on itself, there's actually two independent energy systems, or three, if you wanted to really put it. So there's the national energy market, who covers the west of the east of the country, which with large blocks including Victoria and New South Wales. Then you have the wholesale energy market, which is covering more West Australia. And then there's a smaller area, the Northern Territory Electricity System and Market Operator, that operates in the Northern Territories. So the reason that these systems are divided is actually mostly because of geography. The distances are too large to make an interconnection between them, which means that they are just separated, also physically separated between themselves. These are the wholesale markets. So these are the markets where the large operators are in to the generators and the buyers of electricity on the wholesale market. If you look at the energy transition in Australia, and I'll start with the greenhouse gases, Australia represents around 1.3% of global emissions. In 2018, at the moment, if you look at the trend, they had a peak of around 564 megaton equivalent of CO2. And the objective is to reduce that by 43% on an Australian level, on a federal level, compared to 2005 by 2030. And of course, Australia has also signed the Paris Agreement to achieve net zero by 2050. Now, I'm mentioned explicitly again on the federal level, individual states have pledged different objectives, contributions towards this objective. So the contributions vary between minus 30% by 2030 to minus 50%. If you look at where they are today, current data shows that they are around minus 20% more or less at the end of 2022. So still a lot of work to go, but the decline, the trend is declining already. If you look at the top 10 emitters, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, on the industries that are emitting, but if you look at the top 10 emitters, you can see it's mostly energy companies and mining companies. And that also represents a lot of the energy or the industry actually in Australia. To focus first on the energy companies, you can see clearly that there's a change in the energy mix. So you can see that still today around 30-35% of energy in Australia is generated by coal. But we see a very rapid transition, especially in the last few years, towards more renewables. So hydropower has originally been a large part of the mix as renewables. But in the past few years, we have also seen that solar and wind have taken up a large share of the new energy additions. Most of the coal-fired power plants will also be phased out by 2030, which is in line with the ambitions of the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. If you look at key policies and strategies on a national level, you have rewiring the nation, which is more related to grid solutions. So there's about 20 billion Australian dollar that has been pledged by the government to do an upgrade of the grid infrastructure in Australia over the next few years, which of course is essential to include more renewables into the network. Then you have the National Electric Vehicle Strategy, which at the moment has been announced, but without a lot of policy framework around it. The National Reconstruction Fund, which actually aims to it's actually very similar to the European Green Plan in the sense that they aim to promote domestic green technologies like wind turbine manufacturing, battery and solar panel supply chain and manufacturing, but also electrolyzers, and we'll come back to that later, bioenergy and biomass, and also, and this is a bit surprising, innovative packaging solutions for waste reduction. So also circular economy is actually part of this in a certain way. Then there's the large-scale renewable energy target that has been set. What's interesting to note here is that these were 10-year plans from 2020 to 2030, but actually they already achieved their goal by the end of 2021 in terms of renewable energy generation. Now, the funds that has been set up to support this target is still valid, is still operating, so there are still funds available and instruments that to help promote new investment into renewable energy, but the target has already been met. Then there's of course the small scale renewable energy target, which, as the name implies, is related to solar rooftop, and also a safeguard mechanism related to emission ceiling for large emitters. I haven't put here, and it's very deliberate, anything on a carbon trading system or a carbon tax, and that's very simply because on a national level, the previous government had decided to more or less dismantle the system. The new government that took office in 2021 is still looking at solutions how to implement it in the future, but basically there's no carbon tax at the moment that is valid all over Australia. So that's something that probably will come back in the future, but we don't know yet in which form. Looking at generation technologies, if you look at PV capacity, there's around 28.2 gigawatts installed at the moment. You can see that there's actually quite a steady flow of new PV capacity that has been added over the years, around 2 to 3 gigawatts every year, and it's also expected to continue over the next few years. A lot of it is solar, and it's actually Australia is actually the world champion in solar panels, in domestic solar panels, with 1 in 3 households already having solar panels and also battery systems, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. As you can see in this map that has been divided made up by the World Bank Group, there's a lot of solar resource in Australia, which also makes it quite an ideal place to do it. And you also see, especially, what's interesting to see is that these areas are also similar to desert, or actually represent desert geography, which means that there's also a lot of place to place solar panels. So that's actually quite interesting as well. Going to wind, at the moment there's 9.5 gigawatts. This is exclusively onshore. There's no offshore wind farms yet, but there are big plans, and I'll come back to that a bit later. What's actually interesting to know, and this is both valid for wind and solar, is that the development of new renewable energy power plants usually happens in renewable energy zones. And these are zones that are designated almost like virtual power plants that are actually combining sometimes wind and solar assets, but also substations and all the infrastructure that goes with it, to make sure that the grid connection and all the boundary conditions are actually met to have a new renewable energy zone. And that also comes with a nameplate capacity usually. So there's a planning that precedes the development of new wind farms and also new solar farms in Australia. But also for wind farms, you can see it's around 1 gigawatt every year that is installed, and that rate is also expected to continue over the next few years. Then battery storage. There's at the moment, and it's a bit according to the source, but around a little bit less than 3 gigawatt hours of batteries that have been installed, battery capacity that has been installed. The picture that you see here, maybe SIP, we'll come back to it later, is the Victoria Big Battery that is operating since 2020. So in 2019, there have been 3 consecutive summers, and except for Tasmania, where the peak load is in winter because of heating requirements, but for all the rest of Australia, the peak load is in summer. So they had rolling blackouts during 3 consecutive summers. And for those who remember that, at a certain moment, the Victorian government said, we need a solution for this. We don't want blackouts anymore. And then a certain Elon Musk mentioned, I can do this within 6 months or something like that. And he actually got the tender awarded and built this Victoria big battery in the Victorian desert. So it's a 300 megawatt battery park. There's plans for a Victoria big battery 2, but also in the west of Australia, we see that the battery parks are emerging, both in large scale front of the meter parks, but also in behind the meter solutions for domestic applications. Is it enough? No. Far from it. This is an article that was published a little bit earlier this month, or in February actually, end of February, that mentions that heavy industry needs 250 gigawatts of new wind and solar capacity to go green. And go green in this regard means to meet the 1.5 degree of global warming objective that has been set forward in the Paris Agreement. Now, for those that have really good eyes, you can see that this 250 gigawatt is actually for the domestic industry. However, this article mentions a total of over 300 gigawatts, and that's actually because they also are looking at 170 gigawatts of renewable energy production for hydrogen. So on top of the pure domestic requirement, they are also looking at hydrogen, or at producing additional energy for hydrogen, especially for the export market, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. The objective or the requirements and this is for the 5 largest industries, would be to have around 100 gigawatts already ready by 2035. So if you look at where we are today and where we are going, there's still a lot of capacity additions that will be required in the next few years. What's next? If you ask Australians, they will talk a lot about hydrogen, but also offshore wind is getting a lot of traction within the energy atmosphere in Australia. And you can see this even only by the number of events that are being organized. You see more and more. You really start now offshore wind conferences that are taking place. Hydrogen has been taking place already for a couple of years, but now offshore wind conferences are also taking place. So let's zoom a little bit on that. I already showed the map of the resource potential for onshore wind. This is a zoom on offshore wind. Sorry. What you can see here is actually 3 things. One thing is that the wind speeds, especially in the south of Australia, are actually quite high. They're more or less comparable to the ones that we see in the North Sea, so over 10 meters per second on a yearly average. And with capacity factors that are also quite high. The capacity factors are not listed here, but we are talking about 40, 50 in some states, around Tasmania, for example, even up to 70%. So that are fairly high capacity factors that demonstrate that the potential is actually there. And you can see that the second fact that you can see here, if you have good eyes again, is the water depths. The water depths actually increase quite fast, creating only a limited space for bottom fixed applications. So that means, and that's then the third fact, is that there will be a mix of both bottom fixed offshore wind, but also a lot of floating offshore wind if you want to meet the full potential. And that's also what we see in the developments in offshore wind farms in Australia. So there have been several zones that have been identified by the government for offshore wind developments, and you won't be surprised to see that those zones coincide with the zones that have high potential for offshore wind that you can see on the previous map. So those zones are in principle open. They are located inside the Australian Exclusive Economic Zone, but in the Commonwealth waters. So Commonwealth waters is actually between 3 and 200 nautical miles of the coast. Below 3 miles, if I'm not mistaken, below 3 nautical miles, it's still state territory, but maybe the representatives of the states can go a little bit more into detail about that later. The first region that was opened for offshore wind development is Gippsland. And the second one that has recently been announced is Hunter Valley. Now, if you look at Gippsland, of course, if you look at offshore development and offshore wind development in Australia, everybody talks about Star of the South. It has been on the books already since I think 4 or 5 years now, maybe a bit longer. So the Star of the South project is actually part of this Gippsland development. It's being developed by CIP. So it should have a nameplate capacity of about 2.2 gigawatts and COD around 2028. And that is assuming construction can start in 2025. So this is the first project. Star of the South has actually worked for a very long time without a legal framework. And now, since last year, that legal framework exists, and we'll go a little bit deeper into that. So if you look at the Offshore Electricity and Infrastructure Act that was voted last year, they have 4 types of licenses. There's the feasibility license, that is used to assess the project feasibility, which is at the start valid for 7 years and then allows the developer to undertake feasibility studies and within a legal framework. So you need to meet certain criteria on financial stability, on strategic interest. I think there's also one criteria, and a few others. And that gives you then the possibility to explore the feasibility of a project. You need this feasibility license to apply for a commercial license, and then a commercial license is required to construct these offshore wind farms. They have a validity of 40 years, but initial validity of 40 years. But again, these can be extended as well by the government if required. And then that is combined with the transmission and infrastructure license. So the transmission and infrastructure license is in principle a separate license, but as far as most legal analysts are concerned at the moment, they are linked to the commercial license, and those transmission and infrastructure licenses actually allow you to store and export electricity to the mainland, to the main grid on shore. Then the 4th license that is also mentioned here is the research and demonstration license, which is a license for 10 years, but it's mostly to demonstrate new technologies like wave and tidal energy, even geothermal energy, subsea geothermal energy. So that gives you then the possibility to try and test those new types of technologies. Notable points in this infrastructure, but in this Offshore Energy Infrastructure Act, but also in general, is that there will be a levy. Sorry. So there's a tax that will need to be paid to use the development area. There hasn't been a fixed levy determined in the Act, so it will be on a project basis, but still. There's a clause of non-interference. And this is actually something quite interesting and something that we saw in Belgium as well in the early developments of offshore wind farms, or we had some issues with that in the early developments, because it means that it shouldn't interfere with the current users of that area. And that can be defined quite broadly. It could be that somebody might say, and this is what we had in Belgium, this is the construction of an offshore wind farm will obstruct my view, and I, as a tourist, have I am getting hindered by this development, this new development. But it might also be, for example, that there's a claim of First Nation people in Australia that have a historic connection to these lands. So it's something that we need to be managed in a quite holistic way, and it will require a lot of stakeholder management. Then there's also requirements on change of control and transfers. Of course, if you want to, if you acquire a license and then you want to transfer to another entity, you will need to get some government approvals. Environmental requirements are also a separate part, are not in these feasibility and commercial licenses. So that's something we need to be taken care of. Operations and safety. I've also defined in another act that's actually coming from the oil and gas sector. What's also quite interesting is that there's a lack of maritime spatial planning at the moment. So there's no global maritime spatial plan in Australia at the moment, like we have it in Belgium. Now, of course, there is a lot more sea in Australia than there is in Flanders and in Belgium, but it will require some, for example, for some multi-use cases, it will require some more details. And then finally, decommission requirements, like we see them now also in the new requirements for the Elizabeth zone in Belgium and the developments in France and elsewhere in Europe, will also need to be included. The major stakeholders, and I've just are the states. So the states, because they are managing also the landfall of the export cables and the connection to the grid in part, together with the grid operators. And I mentioned here Victoria and New South Wales, but there are other states, of course, but I just mentioned the two that we have present today. Then the National Offshore Petroleum Safety and Environment Management Authority. They will be responsible for monitoring and enforcing compliance with the Act, environmental obligations, and general operations and safety. So they will, the NOPSEMA will be one of the stakeholders as well. And then finally also NOPTA, the National Offshore Petroleum Titles Administration, who will manage the administration of licenses and maintaining of the register of those licenses. So they are, that's a brief overview. They are building currently a local supply chain, so all the large international players are already in the Australian offshore market. We see Shell, Ørsted, Equinor, CIP, Bluefloat, and a lot of others that have projects announced. If you look at 4C Offshore, you will see that there's about 50 projects in a mix of local and international developers. What's interesting that there's almost no local know-how at the moment. So they have the local know-how in several states on offshore gas development and offshore oil development, but in offshore wind, there's almost no know-how available. So they will build up, like other countries have done, on the experience that they have in oil and gas to build up their own experience in offshore wind, but also, of course, on the big international developers that are there that will bring their knowledge with them. Local buy-in and partnerships will be essential for success. Also, all the big houses that I already mentioned, the big developers, are all working with local developers. Another part that's actually, and it's still lacking, and the Australian government is aware of that, is infrastructure. And infrastructure goes, on one hand, into the grid development, with the National Rewiring Plan, but also in the development of ports that are suitable of catering to an offshore wind development. So that means first for the construction, but also as operation and maintenance hubs. So there's a few things that need to be done there. So as a conclusion, we're still quite early in the process today. So we are in the project of the licensing requirements. If I'm not mistaken, for the Gippsland area, the first project first project applications need to be entered by the end of April. But we see that in the next 5-10 years, the market will kick off. And actually, all the big names that I mentioned before have also marked Australia as one of the top 3 or top 4 developments in Asia Pacific. So next to Taiwan, which is already under development, Japan and Korea, they see Australia as one of the markets that will come up in the next few years. So that was it on offshore wind. Then hydrogen landscape in Australia. We already talked about emissions. I didn't give you a breakdown at that time of what are the top emitting sectors, because it comes now. So you see that transport is by far, and the number fell off, but it's around 1,500 megaton equivalent here, which represents, if I'm not mistaken, around 30% of total emissions. But also manufacturing and mining are the top three, complete the top three of sectors that are greenhouse gas emitting. And what is interesting in this graph is that you see that the top three are actually the sectors that are quite hard to electrify and very hard to abate. So that means that they will have to go to alternative fuels to decarbonize. Another interesting graph that comes from the Department of Energy in Australia is around energy imports and exports. Australia is a big exporter of energy in the form of coal, but also in the form of natural gas. The Department of Industry actually gives quarterly updates. They're very interesting to look at because they give a complete overview of all the energy exports and what are the major contributors, but also the major markets. And at the moment, Australia has around 20% of the global market in LNG, for example. And if you look at what are the main export partners for that, it's China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and India. So mostly located in Southeast Asia. Singapore could have also been here because it's actually number 5. So they are energy for Australia as a commodity that is traded and is actually a very substantial amount of their economy. It represents, if I'm not mistaken, around 220 billion US dollar, Australian dollar per year for energy exports. And of course, you can already see by this graph, especially if you look at coal, but also natural gas, that in the next few years, in the next mid to long term, 20, 30 years, those energy sources, primary energy sources, will be replaced by carbon neutral sources. So Australia has an obligation to keep its trade positive. It needs to find alternatives for these exports. So that also creates, of course, a lot of momentum for the hydrogen sector within Australia. And if you look at that hydrogen sector, the main markets that they see are 2 internal markets and 1 related to export. So the first one is, of course, the industry, which focuses then on one hand on building local supply chain for hydrogen, but also decarbonizing the local industry and manufacturing and mining. Secondly, it's the applications. So we're looking then at transport applications mostly, buses, trucks and boats. And thirdly, of course, as I already mentioned, those export applications. There is a map that is done by it's kept up to date by the Australian Department of Energy. It currently has over 120 industry projects, and this goes from production plants, electrolyzer facilities. So they also have their own gigawatts facility coming up. Over just very simple pilot projects that are ongoing for example, bus refueling. So you already see that there's an industry growing and that opportunities are there to explore. About industry, one that I want to highlight, and I could have put a few others as well, but one that I want to highlight is because it's also a very important name, is Fortescue Future Industries. So Fortescue is one of the largest mining conglomerates in Australia. And Andrew Forrest, who is the CEO and chairman of Fortescue, has made it almost his personal mission to decarbonize the industry. So this is a factory that is currently under construction. The first stone was laid end of last year. And what's interesting which is actually a gigawatt scale electrolyzer factory. What's interesting about the approach here is that actually Fortescue is building a couple of these, and all with different technologies. So they don't want to focus on one specific technology to start with, but for the one in Queensland, they are focusing, for example, on PEM electrolyte electrolyzers with plug power, but they're also focusing on PEM electrolyzers. And actually they want to have the competing technologies developed to see which one comes out best, and then they will continue to develop that one. So they're not betting all on one technology, they're actually diversifying the different technologies that they have. If you look at the use cases, again, Fortescue as a mining company is of course looking at how to decarbonize their fleet of mining trucks. but on the other hand, also vessels, as I mentioned. Boats are quite, or vessels in general, are quite important for the Australian economy, related to the export of all their minerals and natural resources that they have. So of course they want to decarbonize that as well. But as I mentioned, also hydrogen buses and pilot projects around hydrogen buses are coming up everywhere. Maybe circling back to boats, also the aquaculture industry is in certain areas of Australia quite important, and it has a very big fleet that needs to decarbonize as well in the coming years. Finally, on exports, so you see a few trade relations here that have been exporting. You see Australia here, of course, exporting to their trade partners that they already have for natural gas. Japan, there already was the first transport of liquefied hydrogen from Australia to Japan last year, but also Taiwan, South Korea, even China, they will export there. But also Europe is in the spotlight. Australia and several Australian states have made collaboration agreements with the Netherlands, with Germany, and with Flanders, but we'll come back to that in the next slide. There is a small note of criticism that can be heard here in Australia itself. Australia being quite water stressed, of course, to produce hydrogen you need water. And there are some people that are saying, are we really exporting our precious water abroad to compensate or to as an energy export? Maybe also another fact that is interesting to know is that currently it's estimated that the value of hydrogen exports will be around 10 billion Australian dollar by 2040. So if you compare that to the 220 billion Australian dollars of export in energy that Australia currently has, you still see that there's a long way to go, and there will need it's another order of magnitude actually. So that was mostly it. On fit support, so we have taken several initiatives in the past few years, and we will continue to do so. The first one is an MOU that we have on hydrogen and blue economy with Tasmania, and I explicitly say hydrogen and blue economy. When it was signed in February last year, there was a lot of people in the press saying that we would be importing hydrogen from Australia, but actually the MOU, and for those who are available, we are very happy to explain more on that, but or interested. The MOU actually talks about three fronts. It's about academic collaboration to foster hydrogen research. It's about blue economy in the large sense of the word, to see how we can, for example, collaborate on aquaculture, on offshore wind, and the development that will be happening in Australia there. But also, lastly, on hydrogen. And even in hydrogen, we talk about hydrogen applications where there could be technology transfer from Flanders to Australia, and potentially also the export. So the MOU is actually a lot broader than just saying we'll put hydrogen in a ship or hydrogen derivatives like ammonia in a ship and ship it off to Flanders. It's more broader than that. And then, of course, the reason we are here together today, the Belgian Economic Mission that we will have in October, which will be where hydrogen and offshore wind will be a focal point of that mission, but more of will be set by Karim at the end of this presentation. That was it in a nutshell. If you have additional questions, don't hesitate to contact either the Melbourne office with Luca, who will do the closing remarks, or myself. We'd be happy to answer those. Thank you very much. Now I'm happy to give the floor to Justin O'Connor from the Energy Office in New South Wales. So Justin, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, and thanks for doing all the heavy lifting on the context for Australia and all the work that's happening over here. I really appreciate that. So what I'm going to take you through today is very much the focus of my work, which is in developing the state of New South Wales hydrogen industry. And I wanted to take you through the New South Wales hydrogen strategy, which is the state's plan to grow the state into a hydrogen superpower and to take advantage of that new growing economic opportunity. And I've also got some slides at the end just to take you through, give you a taste of some of the details on the offshore wind that's planned for the Hunter region that Kim alluded to. My director, Tim Stock, who's the director of Hydrogen and Clean Energy, who sends his apologies that he couldn't be here tonight. To make up for it, he's actually going to be, he's planning to head over to Belgium, to Flanders, sort of post the World Hydrogen Summit in May. So hopefully you'll get a chance to speak to him then. And in the worst case, we'll see you as part of the mission later in the year. Okay, so before I actually get into the New South Wales hydrogen strategy itself and what we're doing on a policy front, just wanted to, I guess, outline why we think the state has the right conditions to actually build this hydrogen industry in the first place. So, as you would have heard already, this is where New South Wales is located in Australia. We are home to Sydney, and the state is home to Australia's largest population. We are home to existing ammonia production and export at the Port of Newcastle, which is up here, up to 360,000 tonnes per annum. We also have Australia's largest integrated steelworks at Port Kembla, which is this port south of Sydney here, and up to 3 million tonnes per annum there. And so in addition to already having that heavy industry and some of the infrastructure that's going to be required to make, whether it's in terms of hydrogen offtake or hydrogen production. In addition to having that infrastructure there, that also speaks to the fact that we have the workforce, we have the know-how, we have the people who can actually help us make that transition to a new hydrogen economy. So that's a really important point about New South Wales. We have abundant renewable energy resources. And so you can see here on this map, hopefully, there's a few of these white circles here. These are nominated zones for our renewable energy zones, which we'll be doing large-scale wind and solar. These zones will be replacing coal-fired power stations, which will be coming offline in the coming years. There have been 2 more zones that have been announced, including one in the Hunter here, and the offshore wind zone, which I'll talk about soon. And so the idea is that not only do we replace that coal-fired power stations, we also go beyond, so we can take advantage of the hydrogen opportunity, green hydrogen opportunity. In addition to that, not only is it about the generation potential for the solar, wind and offshore wind, because of New South Wales' location between the next 2 most populous states, so Victoria in the south and then Queensland in the north. You saw that map of the national energy market earlier. That means that New South Wales is actually in a position where the transmission infrastructure, the grid infrastructure, passes through our state, which means we already have a lot of that capacity there to support large-scale generation, which we know is going to be necessary to scale up green hydrogen in the future. And lastly, in infrastructure, we are home to Australia's 3 major interstate highways. So as I'll talk to in a minute, we have our Hume Hydrogen Highway Initiative, something that we're actually working with the Victorian government on. And that's kind of our starting point to decarbonise heavy freight and taking advantage of Australia's most trafficked freight route that passes through our state and into Victoria. So all combined, the state already has these prime conditions to foster a hydrogen industry in New South Wales. But on top of that, we've got the New South Wales hydrogen strategy. So I'll talk about some of the leading policy initiatives we have. Before I actually get in, what the policies are, I just wanted to give you this slide to sort of frame and give some perspective on what those policies are. This is an independent review done by the WWF Australia, the conservation organisation. So at the end of last year, they released their renewable superpower scorecard. They did an assessment of all the different governments, the different jurisdictions in Australia, and looked at the progress that these jurisdictions were making in terms of decarbonising their grids and transitioning their economies so that they could take advantage of some of the opportunities in renewable exports. You can see that our state, New South Wales, came at the top of the board for its progress in making that transition, and some of the policies supporting that kind of transition. And then even on the right-hand side, when they did a breakdown of investment in renewable hydrogen, again, New South Wales is well above with a large sheer value of incentives available under our policies, but also just as a proportion of our GDP, it stands out quite considerably. And so this green line here is what they've called their global leadership benchmark. That's looking at some of the government funding available from Germany, France, and Spain. And so again, it also puts in context just how much New South Wales is investing to try and grow this hydrogen economy. So onto the strategy itself. So it's the state's plan to become a hydrogen superpower. There are 60 actions, some that span economy-wide, others that are focused on specific sectors, all part of supporting that aim of industry development. There are $3 billion worth of total incentives under the strategy, which I've already shown is already a huge amount and really puts us in a leading position. And a large part of what those incentives are aimed to do is to bring down the cost of hydrogen production. We know that cost is a major barrier to uptake of hydrogen. So we have a suite of policy incentives designed to help bring that cost down. Our aim is to get the levelized cost of hydrogen to under $2.80 Australian per kilo by 2030. And if you look here on the right, this waterfall chart, this sort of breaks down the policy pathway we have to actually get to that target. So if we have our starting cost of hydrogen here on the left-hand side, these chunks here represent the different policy incentives that we have available under the strategy. These different incentives are stackable, so hydrogen producers can combine those different incentives to help primarily bring down the costs of electricity, which we know is a huge input cost to the production of green hydrogen. So these three chunks on the left-hand side here are about exempting green hydrogen producers from various electricity schemes that are levied on electricity consumers. So green hydrogen producers are exempt from those. Here we have our network charge exemptions. And this is a unique policy where green hydrogen producers who connect in spare parts of the grid can get a 90% exemption from what's called the network use of system charges. And that represents quite a large chunk of electricity here. So again, another large way to reduce the cost of production. We also have grant funding available for various different aspects. I'm going to talk about some of those initiatives in a moment. And we also have our renewable fuel scheme, which is Australia's first incentive scheme for green hydrogen production. And I'll talk to that in a minute too. So onto the first one, which is those electricity charge concessions. So these concessions are aimed, as I've mentioned, to bring down the cost of hydrogen production by targeting electricity costs. For green hydrogen producers who connect in areas of the grid where there is spare capacity and they're bringing their electrolyzer loads online isn't going to trigger any sort of augmentation or alterations to the network, they can get access to these exemptions. It's available for the first 750 megawatts installed by 2030, and it's available for a period of 12 years from approval. So again, there's a lot of talk about the United States Inflation Reduction Act. My understanding is that some of those incentives are available to 2032. But with a 12-year lifespan on these exemptions, we think there's a pretty competitive in terms of their value, but also in terms of the length of time that they can last by well past 2030, depending on when these projects come online. And so these are just the various exemptions that are available. The green hydrogen producer can combine those to get the combined value, which we see could be up to $4 per kilo when you combine the renewable fuel scheme as well. And importantly, green hydrogen producers are able to apply and be pre-approved for these exemptions in the project development phase. So the reason for that is we're trying to help basically make these exemptions bankable so that projects can get to final investment decision. They've been designed specifically to help give that kind of certainty. The applications for these exemptions are already open. They opened just about a month ago, and so we expect to be able to. One thing I should mention is that tomorrow there will be an election in the New South Wales state government. We are in a caretaker period at the moment, which means all the information I'm sharing here is just, on a purely factual basis. That I'm not in a position to be doing any kind of speculation and other things. But just to mention that because we're in caretaker, we're also not in a position to do sort of big marketing campaigns or promotion of these exemptions at the moment, but we're looking to do that once that period is over. So on to the next big incentive scheme for green hydrogen producers, I mentioned our renewable fuel scheme, Australia's first incentive scheme for green hydrogen production. This will kick off in 2024, and it's formed on the basis of we have a legislated hydrogen target in our state. So by 2030, we're looking to have, we're targeting 8 million gigajoules of green hydrogen production, so around 67,000 tons. And how this scheme works is effectively for every kilo of green hydrogen that producers are making, they will get a certificate under this scheme, which they will then be able to sell to the liable parties who are gas retailers and large gas users. And so what that means is that those green hydrogen producers, in addition to being able to sell their green hydrogen, will also be able to sell the certificates under the scheme, and that becomes a different, a second form of revenue for them. So this is, quite a sizable incentive for these green hydrogen producers here. Here we've got the full list of the actual targets, and you can see it ramps up to that 8 million gigajoules at 2030. We also have some indicative conversions to the tons of hydrogen there and the electrolyzer capacity that we're talking about. And that the scheme is set to commence in 2024, but this year the work is underway to have the regulations and the rule gazetted, with some of the key details being worked out, the scheme penalty rate, also the exemptions framework for some of the liable entities that are available, and lastly, how it's going to tie in with the Australian Commonwealth Government's Guarantee of Origin scheme, which is effectively the way to certify that the hydrogen being produced is green. So those are some of the things that are being worked out before that scheme commences next year. Okay, so on to one of our major initiatives. We have up to $150 million available for our hydrogen hubs initiative. These are co-located centers of co-located supply and demand of green hydrogen. We had quite a large number of applicants, but we shortlisted 10 with a combined capacity of 10 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity under those 10 shortlisted applicants. We've actually announced that we've awarded the first 2 of the hubs that have made it through the assessment process, and that assessment process is still ongoing, so there could be further announcements. But the first 2 we have in Moree, which is an agricultural focus here in regional New South Wales. You can see labelled G up there in the north. And so this project will be looking at producing green hydrogen to produce green ammonia, which will then be used for fertilizer and fertilizing cotton. So with the aim of sort of decarbonising that particular product. That's quite an interesting project up there. And the other one, we have our Illawarra project led by BOC, and that's has a mobility focus. This is down in the south of Sydney, closer to to Port Kembla, and closer to where the steelworks area is down south. They plan to have 4 hydrogen refueling stations as part of their project, which could be fueling up to 40 to 50 hydrogen buses and heavy vehicles out of those refueling stations. And so another exciting project down there. And what these projects are looking at is to have 22 megawatts of electrolyzer capacity by 2025, and they will be scaling up over time to have a combined potential electrolyzer capacity of 760 megawatts by 2030. So these projects have been announced, and they'll be looking to achieve final investment decision over the period of this year and next. And also looking to take advantage of some of the incentives that we have available. The next initiative to mention is our Hume Hydrogen Highway, which I referenced earlier. So the Hume Highway, which runs from Sydney and down south through into Victoria, that's a program we're working on with the Victorian government to establish at least 4 hydrogen refueling stations along that freight route, and at least 25 hydrogen-powered line haul trucks. And so New South Wales government has allocated $20 million. It's a $20 million in grant funding available for that program. We're currently going through the assessment process and looking to make announcements mid-year. And this would be a consortium-led project, so that effectively we can solve that chicken and egg problem of how do we get the refueling stations and the trucks. This project is going to still sort of help set up that skeleton framework so that we can decarbonize our own heavy freight industry here. And those projects, like the hubs, will also be looking to be operational by 2025. This next slide, this outlines some of the research projects that we have and the studies that we're looking to do. They'll be coming out this year. Some of these are underway. So the largest one to mention is our statewide hydrogen infrastructure master plan, where we'll be looking at supply and demand nodes, and also distribution and storage across the state, with the aim of looking at how we can get the sort of optimal mix of those different things and take advantage of existing infrastructure, while also noting barriers and opportunities in non-price factors. So this could be things like a skilled workforce, social license issues, etc. And so that studies will come out later this year. We also have our green ammonia market study. This one is getting closer to completion. That should be out in the next couple of months. This is where we're trying to look at what the opportunities will be for green ammonia produced within New South Wales, looking at where we're going to find the biggest opportunities for offtake, both domestically but also internationally. And lastly, reference our port infrastructure assessments, and this is where we are looking to see how we can get our major ports, especially the Port of Newcastle up north and Port Kembla down south, how we can have them ready for any upgrades needed to take advantage of the hydrogen opportunity, but also that they can become export ready over time. So some of the ways we're looking to do this is through feasibility studies and front-loading planning applications, so we can help make those processes smoother. And lastly, I just want to go through to show you, I guess, a list of some of the other programs and initiatives that we have available, which kind of speak to the broader ecosystem of policies and funding that's available to projects that establish in New South Wales, with with hydrogen included. So we have our $250 million renewable manufacturing fund. The exact guidelines for this fund are under development, but hydrogen, in particular electrolyzer manufacturing, is one of the target areas under this fund. We have our $305 million high emitting industries grant, which is looking at how we can take some of the highest emitters in the state and how we can achieve emissions reductions within some of those sites, including the use of hydrogen, say for various heavy industries. A $300 million low carbon product manufacturing fund, which could go towards, say, vehicle manufacturing, including electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles, and also the $110 million regional investment activation fund. And this money, this fund is actually open on a rolling basis to applications, and the money can go towards hydrogen projects that are located in regional areas within New South Wales. the $195 million for the climate technology innovation. This is all about bringing early stage technologies that are at the early commercial and technological readiness levels, helping them go from those early stages so that they can commercialize and scale up. And that's the purpose of that fund. And then we have various other programs under here. Our Action 13, the Electricity Infrastructure Roadmap, is being led by the statutory body Energy, we call Energy Co in New South Wales, and they are leading on the delivery of those renewable energy zones that I pointed to earlier across the state. So those large-scale solar and wind generation sites, including the offshore wind. And the other one to mention here lastly is we've recently published some planning guidance material to help make it easier for hydrogen projects to get off the ground here in the state, and we'll be publishing further supporting material on regulations relating to hydrogen in the very near future. So just in summary, New South Wales has got world-leading incentives, and we're looking to use these to drive down the cost of hydrogen, which will support scale-up of the industry over time. And those incentives we value at over $4 per kilo. So again, coming back to the comparison with the United States Inflation Reduction Act, we think we are very competitive there. As the industry scale-ups, we're looking at having a domestic hydrogen industry of 1 million tonnes by 2050, supported by our hydrogen hubs, highways, and green ammonia. And by having such a strong domestic hydrogen industry, we see that as a really stable base for export projects coming out of New South Wales as well. We have our 5 renewable energy zones, which underpins our abundant, cheap, clean, renewable energy in the state, and that extensive transmission infrastructure that I've referred to. And as the not only being the Australia's most populous state, we also have the most STEM graduates and most highly skilled workers in the country. So that, along with some of the export terminals and the heavy industry infrastructure that we have there, we have a really strong base for starting our hydrogen industry in New South Wales. So that's the hydrogen aspect of my presentation, and that's really where I work in. I have gotten some slides from a colleague of mine at Energy Corporation of New South Wales, or Energy Co. And this, I'm just going to go through these briefly, but this will just hopefully give you a bit of a zoomed-in insight to what's happening in New South Wales offshore plans. So if I come here to this map, we could see there is the potential to complement the renewable energy zone that's going into the Hunter region. And if you allow me to jump back to this map for a moment, the Hunter region is this one up here in the north of Sydney. So we're talking about this area up here. And so the offshore wind would be located to some very large energy users, such as the Tomago aluminium smelter, which is a massive energy user in New South Wales. And so we see it having a role in being able to help decarbonise the energy that goes to powering that site, but also many of the heavy sites, heavy industry up in that region. It would also go towards the Hunter's plans to become a hydrogen hub and take advantage of the Port of Newcastle that's located there. And so we have opened for registration of interest in looking at developing offshore wind in this Hunter region. And there was a significant interest in that when we opened those, with 7 offshore wind projects proposed. This is just a view of some of the proposed area that's available here. So on the 23rd of February, just last month, the Federal Minister for Climate Change and Energy announced this Hunter offshore zone, and a consultation process has begun, which will be closing late next month. And then on the basis of all the feedback, assessment of all the feedback that comes through in that consultation period, the final zone will actually be declared of where offshore wind is going to take place in the Hunter. And so once it is declared, that's when the invitation will open for developers to apply for the feasibility studies. So there's real opportunity in the Hunter to invest and to get involved in what's happening up there. Okay, so that is my presentation for today, but I'm happy to take questions when we get to the question time. Thank you very much.
Okay, then we can go to, thank you very much, Justin. Then we can go to Sip here in the room. Yeah.
Good morning and good evening to everybody. My name is Sip Hoogstra. I'm the Benelux representative for Invest Victoria, based here in Brussels. Unfortunately, Peter Dzinski of our energy group was not available today, so I will try to replace him as good as possible. I'm not an energy expert, but if there are any questions that I can't answer, we'll make sure that you can get a one-on-one with our energy group if necessary. First, maybe a short introduction. Sorry. First, a short introduction to Invest Victoria. Invest Victoria, in fact, has the same role as Flanders Investment and Trade has here for Flanders. And as you can see today also, we are complementing each other and we are working closely together. So what's the role? We're helping Victoria companies to go international and help them with trade and export. And we help foreign companies to land in Victoria. Invest Victoria has deep links with government, with industry and knowledge institutes. So we can help you to get accompanied by the experts in the field that you need. You see some of the services that we supply when you want to establish in Victoria. And that can be from office, production, R&D, or otherwise. Good news is that all the services are free of charge, like with Flanders Investment and Trade, I think. And one of the things, please remember, if it's only for export that you're looking to export to Victoria, then I will refer you to our colleagues of Flanders Investment and Trade who can help you there. For the business environment in Victoria, there are several good arguments that I would like to go into. First of all, I want to say that all of Australia is an easy, safe and transparent place to do business. For Victoria, what stands out is that they're one of the lowest business taxes in Australia. We have leading universities, Monash, University of Melbourne, and RMIT, just to name a few. Livability, I think maybe you know, Melbourne has been quoted every year in the top 10 and very often as #1 for the most livable city for many years, and it's a sporting and cultural capital of Australia as well. If you look at the economy, you have to understand, if you look at the map, Victoria is only 3% of the landmass, but it has 25% of the economic output in Australia. So also the economy is as large or larger as economies such as Singapore or Vietnam or even New Zealand. And it's a gateway to Asia Pacific. It's in the same time zone, but you also have 600,000 people speaking an Asian language. So there are many links with Southeast Asia, with Asia, especially India, China, Malaysia, and Vietnam. These are some of the international companies that have already settled down in Victoria. And as you can see, it's from all the different sectors, from digital economy, advanced manufacturing, which of course is quite interesting for what we're talking about today, health and life sciences, agri-food, and the new energy, which brings us to today's topic. So what are the opportunities for renewable hydrogen and offshore wind in Victoria? there is a lot happening, both in hydrogen and in offshore wind in our state. But I want to say first, Victoria will not be the place where there will be the largest production of megawatts. Victoria just doesn't have the available land or the ideal climate as some of the other states have. But Victoria is today already the industrial center of Australia with a large and growing population. So that means it will be the place where there will be most usage for the new energy. So you can look at Victoria as the place where you can upload the energy. It's a test bed, and it's a place from where you can service the Australian market. On wind, I think on onshore wind, that is spread out throughout Australia, and I think most of the states have a good onshore wind capabilities. But on offshore wind, I think Victoria has, you've seen the map that was shown in the beginning, it has the largest potential, and it's really the capital for offshore wind. Right. Yes. So the different elements that make it interesting. On storage, Victoria has one of the largest gas infrastructures and depleted gas fields in Australia, which can be used for storage. There are major trading routes already existing between Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia, Queensland. Quite interesting, there is renewable carbon, where, for instance, there's the project in Portland that makes timber into methanol that can be used to ship green fuels. Methanol is much less toxic than ammonia. And unlike some other parts of Australia, and we just heard about it, Victoria has sufficient sustainable water sources. And I think the most important message is that Victoria has the most ambitious target to go to net zero by 2045. And this is similar to what Europe has, and which means that you will be working in a similar environment as here in Europe and without competition of the fossil fuels. And this is already happening. The goal for 2020 was to go to 25% renewable energy, and that was achieved on schedule. And today already there have been announcements for the closing of coal mines 20 years before their end of life, in fact. And the interesting thing about it, these are privately owned coal mines, which emphasizes that it's both business and government are driving this. So in general, we can say that sorry, I went too fast, I think. In general, we can say that Victoria is focusing on, in hydrogen, on the storage and mobility, and for the wind, it's especially on the offshore wind. So about the storage, like I said, there are many, and you can see it on this map, there are many depleted gas fields that can be used for long storage duration. And that can then be pulled back out by turbine or fuel cells. And there's even research ongoing if the extended gas pipeline infrastructure can also be used for storage. As you can see, there are already working on some pilot projects, Boundary Power and Telstra. But, and I've heard it before, Victoria is what they call industry agnostic, and they want to try everything. So it's not, they are open to new technologies and ideas to see what comes out on top, I would say. So there's room for everybody and for all different types of technologies. And on mobility, Victoria wants to be the leader in hydrogen mobility. The goal is to decarbonize, and especially then in the heavy transport, which is abundantly there. And like Justin just told us in the presentation before, Victoria is working with New South Wales on the Hume Hydrogen Highway, installing the first hydrogen refueling network. But they're also looking at other freight routes, for instance, to the west, from Melbourne to the west, to South Australia. By 2025, Victoria will stop purchasing diesel-powered buses. Most of them will be replaced by EV, but there will be place also for hydrogen for the longer route. And there are already some investments coming into, such as Hyzon, who set up its Australian headquarters in Melbourne and will be building green hydrogen fueling depots for buses. And again, there's room for suppliers in the mobility space, from heavy vehicles, trucks, buses, garbage trucks, there's an example, but also refueling station, fuel cells, electrolyzers, etc. Here just an overview of the many initiatives already taken in Victoria. And again, I think it's important to see Victoria as the most appealing domestic market in Australia. And they're open to everybody that can contribute to the success of hydrogen as a new sustainable resource. And again, not just for the OEMs, but specifically also for the suppliers to the OEMs that are currently lacking. If we go to the offshore wind, you've seen the map, and I think that showed already the strait between Victoria and Tasmania. Victoria has some of the best wind resources in the world, which makes it a leader for offshore wind in Australia. And we heard about the first Australian offshore wind farm that is built on the Gippsland coast. It's projected that they will start with production in 2028. We'll go to about 2 gigawatts in 2032. That is approximately 20% of the Victoria's energy consumption. They will double that to 4 gigawatts in 2035 and to finally go to 9 gigawatts in 2040. So here you see a map of the two areas, and I think Kim showed us already the two main areas for offshore wind in Victoria, which is the Gippsland zone to the east and the Portland zone to the west. And besides the favorable wind conditions, there's also the advantage of reasonably shallow waters. There are existing deep sea port infrastructure available. And what's probably also special for Victoria, there is an existing infrastructure on land because of the Latrobe Valley, which is a bit north of Melbourne, where there has been a lot of infrastructure has been put in place already, which can be used and upgraded for these offshore wind projects. So these are the projects that are currently under development or that's under process. We heard about the Star of the South, the first offshore wind park. As I said, foreseen for 2028, and I can tell you it's on track. Further projects are the Flotation Group, the Sea Dragon project. Unlike the name Flotation Group, it will be bottom fixed in this case. And there's the Macquarie project on the Basque Coast. To summarize again the opportunities in offshore wind, sorry. You heard already the big developers, the CIPs and Iberdrolas, etc., are already in Melbourne. The money is there, but now we need the Victoria supply chain and technology. And Kim already mentioned it, that is missing at the moment still. Victoria wants to what they call skill up and scale up. So if you want to add to this, please do. And Invest Victoria, of course, will be glad to support you to land your investment project in Victoria. So with this, we come to an end. Like I said, if you have any questions later, you can always contact me. You see the contact details on the slide. And of course, I hope to see everybody of you in Victoria in October during the Belgian Economic Mission. And if you can't wait that long, we will be at the World Hydrogen Summit in Rotterdam in May. So if you want to have a meeting there, please let me know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for your presentations. I will get back to the Belgian Economic Mission and what's in it for companies in the energy sector. So in a nutshell, the mission is first going to Sydney, then to Melbourne, and it will consist of a mix of elements. So first, important to mention, each company participating can request a tailor-made B2B program that will be set up for you by our office in Melbourne. So according to your goals and the context you wish to meet. Next to this, there are also seminars and conference sessions planned. The idea there is to showcase the Belgian know-how and also to learn about the priorities and the projects in Australia. There will also be networking receptions in the presence of Princess Astrid. There will be signing ceremonies, so this can be a good opportunity for you to put an agreement between you and your Australian partner in the spotlight. There will be company visits to local companies, Australian ones, or to Belgian companies that are established in Australia. I will just go back one slide. I will run through the program as it is now, day by day, and highlight the events that are relevant for the energy sector. So the departing flight in Brussels is foreseen on Thursday the 19th, with arrival in Sydney on Friday the 20th. Or you might be flying in from Taipei if you are participating to Energy Taiwan, the fair that is taking place from the 18th till the 20th. Saturday the 21st is conceived as a resting day and taking into account the considerable time difference between Belgium and Australia. But we kick off on Sunday in Sydney with, in the afternoon, an information session for the whole Belgian delegation with a networking drink. On Monday, we foresee the following on the program. There will be a specific seminar on offshore wind and green hydrogen organized by vindt and the state of New South Wales. Kim already referred to the MOU that was signed last year between Flanders and Tasmania. There are now negotiations going on to sign a similar MOU between Flanders and New South Wales. So we hope to see the signing of that taking place during the mission. Next to this, every company can have their individual B2B meetings, and also on Monday evening, the Belgian official reception is scheduled. On Tuesday, each company can have their own individual meetings and/or, depending on your preference, site visits in New South Wales can be scheduled. For example, a visit to Port Kembla. In the evening, companies in the energy sector depart to Melbourne for the All Energy Fair. And maybe a word on the All Energy Australia exhibition. It is the largest gathering of the renewable energy professionals in Australia, so and it will coincide with the Mission Week. It will take place during 2 days, 25th, 26th of October, and consists of an exhibition with booths on the one hand and conference sessions on the other hand. And Flanders Investment and Trade will have a 36 square meter booth to promote the know-how of Flemish companies. So if you would be interested in participating in this fair, my colleague Shirley Sevango is the person to contact. I have understood that registrations will open end of March, but everyone in this session will receive an invitation. So going back to the program, Wednesday the 25th in Melbourne. So there will be this anchor event, All Energy Australia, with the vindt booth. And we will also organize within All Energy Australia a conference session on green hydrogen with the aim to promote the Belgian expertise in this field to the Australian audience. On Thursday, the 26th, again, there is the All Energy Australia event, the booth, and then we will organize another session within the conference on offshore wind, again, showcasing the expertise we have in Flanders to an Australian audience. Friday, the 27th, is the last day of the program. Companies then can have their individual B2B meetings in Melbourne, or possible site visits can be scheduled. For example, to Tasmania, for companies to whom this is relevant, with a visit to the port of Bell Bay. In the evening on Friday, a departure to Brussels is foreseen, or on Saturday, if companies are going to Tasmania, or of course, it's always possible to extend your stay if this is relevant for you. I hope all these sessions and information have given you appetite to join the BEM Australia. So registrations are open. You can use this QR code to find all the practical information and registration modalities. So that was it for me. I give the floor to Luca.
Thank you, Karine, and thank you to all the participants, and above all, thank you also to the speakers, so Kim, Justin, and Siem. I think that the presentation today gave a very good overview of what is going on at the moment in Australia, and more specifically in the states of New South Wales and Victoria. From my point of view, just one suggestion. We saw that there are a lot of opportunities in Australia, and I must say that Australia is definitely very open to collaborate with foreign companies providing solutions for the supply and technology chain, as we discussed. What is important to understand is that Australia is now the target of many countries, of many foreign companies. So many of them are looking at Australia as an opportunity to expand their business, to generate renewable energy, to sell that energy to the domestic market, to the international market. So geographically speaking, Australia is very far from Belgium. That's something that we won't be able to change. But don't wait too long to start considering Australia as a destination market for your company, because other companies are already present. Other companies are already actively exploring the opportunity to set up a business in Australia. Why? It's not only because there's a lot of land, a lot of natural resources, a lot of commitment also from the governments. It's also something that, above all in Europe nowadays, we consider very important. So it's a democratic country with a solid political system, a solid financial system, a very transparent bidding system as well. Is a place where you can place that you can rely on. So it's not just to diversify your energy mix. It's also to diversify sometimes the source of the energy. So Australia is definitely now one of the top country in terms of appetite from international conglomerate. We saw also in the news recently some Japanese holdings buying out Flemish or Belgium companies operating the offshore wind. It's not because they don't know what to do. It's simply because Australia will be definitely one of the country offering more opportunities in renewable energy, more opportunities, of course, in green hydrogen and offshore wind. So my strong advice is to join the mission, explore the opportunities, benefit from the assistance that FIT will provide you. We are very much interested in assisting you in creating a tailor-made program. Yes, as Karin mentioned, the mission will go to Sydney first and then to Melbourne, but it's also true that if your company has some interest in other states of in Australia, we're more than happy to accommodate that. So my message is quite simple. Don't wait too long and join the mission. Thank you. Actually, another element. All Energy Australia is definitely a very interesting occasion to meet with most of the companies operating in the industry. Last year, I think that we hit something like 15,000 visitors. This year will be more because the size of the trade show expanded, so they increased by, I think, 20% the exhibition ground, and the opportunity to attend the free of charge conference session is quite important. You will be able to meet with all the stakeholders during those 2 days in just one location. So it's definitely something to take into consideration when you want also to have an informal conversation with a prospect partner. Of course, if you are not in Australia, it's like to any other country. It's not that you're operating from Belgium, you want to be part of a bidding process. You can, of course, but it's better to start selecting the potential local partners, companies that you can collaborate with in order to be part of the bidding process, in order to start, how can I say, facilitate a conversation with the government and all the national body that are, of course, responsible for some industries. So again, if you want to give a go, I think that the Belgium Economy Mission is the right opportunity for you. So I don't know if there is any question coming from the audience, above all from online.
No, everything was clear here in the room. I don't know if anybody online has a question.
Maybe another comment from my side, because we mentioned the World Hydrogen Summit that will be held not too far from Flanders. That might be another opportunity to meet with companies coming, or companies or government agency coming from Australia. From what I know, 5 out of 6 states will be there, and probably 1 out of 2 territories will be there. So again, an interesting opportunity to start learning a bit more about the industry. What are the opportunities? I think that both states were very clear on what is the commitment from New South Wales and Victoria on this. and what are the opportunities also to benefit from some of the incentives. But again, you don't have to look at Australia just for the incentive, of course, but you have to look at Australia as an opportunity to start expanding your business. And then, as you know, Australia, it is the bridge to Southeast Asia. So many Australian companies or foreign entities operating in Australia are already dealing with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. So it is the opportunity not just for the domestic market, but also to expand to the entire region.
Maybe one question. There's a lot of regulatory framework being set up for licensing and organization of the projects, but is there also something on the market side, on the offtake side? Incentives for offshore wind or hydrogen, a CFD or kind of a mechanism to actually create a market, or is that left to the market mechanisms of off-takers globally?
In general, for renewable energy projects, each states have its own mechanism. So there are some that work with the feed-in tariff, there are some that work with the CFD, but I would be unable to comment for Victoria and New South Wales. Maybe Justin or Steve can give more information how it's organized there.
That's on the current renewables, so yeah, not necessarily for offshore or hydrogen.
Right. I'm not sure. Justin, if you want to add something, or?
So can you see my screen, my slides?
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't put this one in, but this is a reference to the state's electricity infrastructure roadmap, which is effectively New South Wales' plan to build out the renewable energy capacity of the state as the coal-fired power stations come out, are closed down, and we need more renewable generation. So there are minimum objectives legislated for renewable generation, and also the Energy Corporation, Energy Co, is responsible for coordinating the delivery of those 5 renewable energy zones. And in terms of how they work in the actual delivery, it's the long-term energy supply agreements that are supplied there. So it does work on a contract for difference model in our state, which effectively means there's there's that confidence when the that's not just for generation, that's also for firming and energy storage as well. So we call these long-term energy supply agreements, LTESs. That's how the model works in our state.
And that's through regular auctions, or how does it?
That's right. So every 6 months they have an auction system. Started from late last year.
And it's a general CFD for all technologies, or is there separate brackets for each technology?
I'm sorry, I may have to take that question on notice, but yeah, my understanding is at least I believe it's general for at least the generation capacity, and then maybe and also for the storage and firming capacity. I'm not sure if it gets broken down any further than that, but I can take that question on notice and get back to you if you like. In terms of hydrogen as well, green hydrogen, most of the incentives to date are towards the supply side, so about bringing down the cost of production, and to the extent that that sort of helps, off-takers purchase, makes them more competitive with the incumbent fuels. There's also the setup of those hydrogen hubs and the development of the Hume Hydrogen Highway. So those kind of projects are really, helping those first movers get off the ground, so that the hubs need to have some kind of demand and offtake as part of their proposal. And of course, the Hume Hydrogen Highway sets up the infrastructure for demand to grow as well through those heavy vehicles. So that's how the model is sort of working at this stage. Oh, and I should mention as well the renewable fuel scheme. So that's the demand. There's the hydrogen target legislated that we have there. So that also sort of creates some demand for hydrogen in our state.
We also saw the extension of the grid. Will that extension be managed by the current transmission companies, or will that also be open to us?
Yes, so I guess for our state, that expansion of transmission will be led by Energy Corporation. They'll be responsible for delivering that, especially for the transmission that is connected to the new renewable energy zones. Yeah, it is getting somewhat, I should qualify, it's getting somewhat outside of my expertise, which really is on the hydrogen side. But yeah, for what that's worth, I know that Energy Co are leading on the rollout of that transmission.
Okay, thank you.
If I can add one element to this, is the fact that I'm definitely not an expert, but from a geographical point of view, you can notice that both Victoria and New South Wales are focusing on regional hubs, where you already have infrastructure and you already have off-takers. So other states in Australia are basically building ghost towns along the coast, so we have plenty of natural resources, but a desert with no off-taker close by, no real infrastructure. So big project, big numbers, but then visibility, not sure. I had the chance to visit the major areas in Victoria and New South Wales, and activities are already there. I mean, companies are already there. The off-takers are naturally interested in this. And the grid distribution infrastructure is already there. Of course, it has to be expanded because, of course, needs that. But it's not starting from scratch. It's not starting from zero.
That's a very important point. And if you were to participate in the mission and visit, say, Port Kembla, you would see, Australia's largest integrated steelworks. You'd see where the site of that one of the first announced hydrogen hubs is, led by BOC. So you'd actually get to see, what's already in play and why, some of the existing heavy industry has already, created the demand, and the transmission infrastructure is already there to sort of build upon. So, it's a good point, Luca. We're not quite starting from scratch, as it were.
But what this is important because in Europe, of course, we are used to a lot of density. So the companies, the off-takers they create a cluster simply by proximity. They are one close to the other, so that's a cluster. In Australia, it's not like that. We don't have only 66 kilometers of coastline like in Belgium. So they have just a few more kilometers of that. And of course, the risk is that you don't have the kind of density. But again, both in Gippsland and Port Kembla, you have that, of course, also in Newcastle. So some of these areas are definitely already populated. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You already have companies in other activities in the area that could be a really beneficial, mutual beneficial opportunity.
Okay.
No more questions? Okay.
Okay, sorry, again, just the last point. Because we simply mentioned All Energy Australia and the conferences. So the sessions that we will have 2 sessions dedicated, one to green hydrogen, the other one dedicated to offshore wind. It's important to know that we're not simply sponsoring this session. We are running the session. So last year we did the same. We had the opportunity to indicate the panelists. Kim was the moderator, if you want, or the chair of the panel. So it's up to us to tell the story we want. Of course, it has to be a relevant story. But again, this is an opportunity for those campers joining the mission to be protagonists, not just to be there, but just to be under in the spotlight. So that's another element to take into consideration. And now I'm finished.
Okay, then thank you all for attending. For any questions, you can still, of course, reach out to either the colleagues in Melbourne, to Kim, or to myself. And I wish you all a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you in Sydney.
Thank you.